Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. I had a game recently that really opened my eyes to the usefulness of demolition ships, and maybe you've had a similar experience at some point. I'm playing as the Chinese, and I have 4 demolition ships with my cannon galleons and a few galleons, and I get caught out by an equal or greater number of Aztec fast fire ships. Now, cannon galleons are terrible against fire ships because of minimum range, but I send the demo ships in first just to go down fighting. The first demo ship takes out 7 fire ships, and the next one takes out 5, and the last 2 take out 3 enemy ships each. That's 4 of my ships trading for 18 and basically saved my navy there. Later on, same game, I'm getting pushed back across the shallows, but just a few demo ships managed to send his whole army into retreat, and had I known that trebuchets took 2 hits, that probably would have gone even better and with more of a surprise element. It got me wondering about demo ships and what situations they're useful in. So let's take a look at them in more depth to hopefully set you guys up for some epic explosions of your own. Now, you don't see demo ships in every water game, but that's not from lack of accessibility, and most civilizations do have access to them. The only ones without them entirely are the Aztecs and Koreans. The heavy demolition upgrade is also available to every civilization except for a small handful. If we look at the cost of demolition ships, it's kind of interesting that all 3 of the basic ship types cost the same amount of resources, just distributed between wood and gold a bit differently. Demo ships are the most gold intense, though the difference isn't that large, and they have a pretty cheap upgrade. One thing to keep in mind though is you need to get the war galley upgrade before you can upgrade your demolition to heavy demolition ship in the Imperial Age. Now personally, I find the upgraded versions of the demolition ship and fire ship to be a bit tougher to visually identify than a lot of other units, maybe because I don't see them as often, but if you look for that yellow square in the back, that means it's a non-upgraded version, and they also go from 1 sail to 2. The fire ship keeps the yellow thing in the back before and after the upgrade, and I use the bigger aft sail to tell if it's a fast fire ship or not, and it's also clearly more gray on the deck. Or you could just click on it, I suppose. Now in the expansions it's a little different, and you start with the demo raft, which is automatically upgraded to the regular demolition ship when you get the war galley research, which similar to the standard version unlocks the heavy demolition ship. I find it's not totally intuitive that you upgrade your demolition rafts by getting war galley, so try to keep that in mind. There's also a slight change in that they have 10 more HP in the expansions, which lets them take 1 more hit from galleons, and they're a bit more likely to reach their targets. Now in terms of speed, they're the fastest of the non-trade ships, including the longboat, which means outrunning them isn't going to be an option, and they're significantly faster than most land units as well, especially after getting the dry dock technology. Now let's talk about what kind of damage you can get out of them. The regular demolition ships have 110 damage, and the heavy have 140. Unfortunately, against ships, those numbers can't be trusted at face value. The regular demo ship only does 85 damage in practice against galleons, and the heavy demolition ship does 120. But as a general rule, 2 demo ships that reach their target can take out any Imperial Age ship. That rule applies pretty well to the heavy demolition ships as well, with only a couple of exceptions. Against coastal buildings, they have more than 200 bonus damage, which sounds impressive when you say it that way, but they're still not a great long-term option considering you need 7 to take out a dock, 8 to take out a tower, and 21 to take out a castle, give or take a few depending on upgrades. Unless there's some strategic reason you have to bring down a particular dock and don't care what it costs to do it, in general you're not going to want to waste them against buildings. Now against land units, as we saw earlier, they can end up being pretty devastating, especially in shallows and ice, where land and water units can both travel. The most obvious comparable unit to me is the petard, and I have looked at those before and found that they're very ineffective against normal land units. And the biggest problem there is that they only have 25 attack. Demolition ships have over 100 attack, so most weak units in the area are going to be taken out. Even paladins are going to lose roughly half their HP if they're in the immediate area of the explosion. That brings up the next question though, which is what is the explosive range? It seems a lot better than the petard, and just look at how many paladins here are taking damage. If we squeeze the paladins in around a heavy demolition ship in standard line formation, you can easily have 30 units hit by the heavy demolition explosion. If I pick some colors to make it a little bit easier to see, we can see that from the point of impact for the demolition ship, there's a blast radius that diminishes in strength. At point blank, the damage was between 104 and 113, and the next ring was about 70 damage, and then the last ring was about 35, with the odd 12 damage or so outside of that. That puts the effective range, so to speak, at 2 tiles and a bit of splash damage 3 tiles away. This is where the heavy demolition upgrade pays off though. If we get that upgrade, not only does it increase the attack by 30, but the area of effect also increases by an extra tile, giving it 3 very effective close tiles and 1 fringe damage tile outside of that. Another quick visualization of that is here with the regular demo ship killing pretty much everything within 2 tiles, and then a bit of fringe 20 to 25 damage outside of that, and then the heavy demolition ship we can see is getting 1 tile of extended range. Here's yet another visualization with the explosion and then 3 tiles being impacted significantly, and then just that 1 last tile getting a tiny bit of damage. Now I thought it might be worth looking into some ways to prevent the damage of incoming demo ships by limiting the units in that range and spreading them out. For a baseline, if you have 1 unit per tile, that limits the damage to around 10 to 15 units. So is that the same as staggered formation? Well, it's actually not quite the same thing, and staggered formation sets them a bit closer than that, so you'll be looking at more like 18 to 22 units taking the full hit, which, to be fair, is still significantly better than the bunched up line formation, which can lose anywhere from 25 to 60 depending on where in your line the demo ship hits. If you do see one going in for a hit, it's definitely worth trying to get a last minute stagger formation in, and it can easily save you a few dozen units. Another thing you might think to try is to destroy the ship as it's approaching, and the thing about that is if you destroy it, it still does damage to your units, just measured from that explosion points. So if your units are within its 2 to 3 tile range, you're probably just helping it detonate by firing at it. That also brings up the question of whether you can delete the demo ship instead of just targeting a unit with it, and sometimes you'll have a bit of trouble with pathfinding getting them to hit the target, especially with lag, and in that situation you can just hit delete with the ship selected. I've tested it out and you get the same end result of damage either way. Just remember to select them one at a time, because if you have multiple selected you might detonate the wrong one. That being said, if you double click one to select all of them that are on the screen, that one always seems to be detonated first when you press delete, and there's clearly some other patterns to the detonation order as well. It's also kind of cool that your own demo ships can't damage your units, which I'm not sure I understand the logic behind, but it definitely makes them more useful in mixed navies. Now, there's one last idea I want to look at that I think is a bit beyond basic mechanics, which is this pattern I've seen of people going for demo ships when they're falling behind on the water, and I'd like to figure out if there's some quantifiable advantage to demo ships in that situation. To test it out, I had a passive AI patrol some demo ships into my galleons, and we can see 20 versus 20, it's pretty even, which makes sense since they cost about the same resources. If I send 20 heavy demolition ships against 10 galleys, we see you have a little more than half of them left over, and if we reverse the numbers, again, it's about half left over at the end. They seem pretty evenly matched at this point, but we're only talking about 2-to-1 ratios here. I played around with more combinations of more extreme ratios between the number of galleons and demo ships, and I compared the ratio of galleons to heavy demolition ships at the start and the percentage of ships remaining for that side that won. If we graph it, it looks like this, which is reasonable enough as the ratio of galleons to demo ships increases along the x-axis, the percentage of galleons remaining goes up. That sounds intuitive, but if we look at the details, the relationship is actually a little strange. To show you why, we're going to have to go into a bit of math and military theory for this one. On this graph, we have the relative size of your fleet compared to your opponents on the x-axis, so 3 meaning you have 3 times their number of ships, and the y-axis is the percentage of your ships remaining at the end of the fight. As a general question, if I were to say to you that you have twice as many units as the enemy and you fight, what percentage of your troops do you think you would have left over in the end? The most intuitive idea is that you would lose half, because that feels equal. If you start with 100 units and they have 50, it makes sense that you would kill 50 and they'd kill 50 of yours. Let's graph that line and call it the linear line, because it's describing a linear relationship of you and your opponent losing your armies at the same speed until someone runs out. Don't worry about the fact that the line itself is curved and not linear on our graph, because that's a result of the axes that we've chosen. Now probably some of you know that that's not always the case in combat, because there's also this ganging up when you have more units, and maybe you know it as Lanchester's square law, or maybe you just know it because you've seen it in practice. But either way, there's an inherent advantage to having greater numbers, and you take fewer losses than your opponent. According to the square law, the line should go more like this, and we'll call that the square line, because in its calculation you square the relative army sizes. To illustrate why the demo ships are such an outlier, let's take a look at small-scale galley fights as a reference. I ran a similar test of AI galleys patrolling into each other, and this is the general trend. It seems to be a magnified version of the square line. If I took their partial HP into account and I ran a lot of trials, I would expect it to be pretty close to that blue line. And the same thing would go for most matchups of ranged units in real-time strategy games. Here's what's weird though. If I take that information about our galleon versus heavy demolition ship and I plot the data where the galleons outnumber the demo ships, the line looks like this. My trend line was kind of eyeballed there, but you can see that the points are gathered around the linear line much more than the square line. And plotting the data from when the heavy demolition ships outnumbered the galleons, it looks like this. Again, it's a lot closer to that linear relationship than the squared relationship. That has some interesting strategic implications, because if demo ships aren't affected by relative navy ratios as much, it makes sense to use demolition ships in situations where that normal ganging up effect is working against you. An example might be when your opponent has naval superiority and you're trying to fight your way back onto the water. If your opponent has 40 galleons and for some reason you can only make 20 ships, assuming you're just doing some basic patrolling, you'll get more out of demo ships than either galleons or fire ships. And I think this effect is playing a big role in that result. On the other hand, if you have naval superiority, that's not the time to start making demo ships, since you won't be taking advantage of the effect that's already working in your favor with ranged water units. The exact mechanism going on behind the scenes there is probably a little bit complicated and has to do with a combination of pathfinding and range and the size of galleons in line formation and probably some other things, but it's a neat little effect that you can take advantage of or watch out for if you think your opponent is going to use it against you. If you suspect your opponent is going for mass demo ships soon, I think the best response would be to add a few of your own in front because they throw the whole thing out the window. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.